I'm curious, when SpaceX puts up all their Starlink satellites, sometimes we hear astronomers grumble about what this is doing to the night sky. For someone like you who does a lot of missions, I'm just curious, as companies rush into space, you have the advantage of more rocket launches, cheaper ones, satellite technology sort of modernizing and becoming cheaper, but is this like net good for you or net bad as companies come to space?
I think the commercial partnership with NASA and having more launches is critical to science, actually. Because when we have more launches, that means we have more opportunities, and we don't have to have, we're not tied to launches and piggybacking all on one rocket the same way. And so we can get more science done, and we have a much higher ROI, net return on the investment. When we think about if we can get more done for cheaper, we absolutely should. That's how we can push different mission classes. So NASA often works in mission classes that are between $1 billion plus, maybe $500 million as a starting point. But with lower launch costs, we can actually take that down and we can get more science done. And I think it's absolutely a strong partnership that NASA and the commercial sector need to continue to push.
Is this something people are just wrapping their heads around now as the rocket companies are appearing, or you guys have seen this coming and now there's a lot more science being prepared to take advantage of all this?
Well, as scientists, we're always ready with things to put on a rocket and go explore with. But I think NASA's been thinking about this for a while. So when we think about Vader, which is that venture class acquisition for, for basically different kind of mission classes, we're looking for other launch providers. And even you think about CLPS, so that's the commercial lunar and payload services. We're looking for commercial partnerships because we need to start branching out more. And so I think NASA is testing the waters with programs like that now to see how they go and how viable these business models are for forming that partnership between commercial and space. And I think we're thinking about it, but it's looking good. I'm hoping to see more.
I kind of want to get into maybe how NASA evolves as we go in a second. But Chris, you guys have a mission coming up that I think sort of gets at the heart of a lot of what I was talking about. It's called Tropics. I'll let you explain it, but maybe in some of this context of sort of how, not to abuse the term new space, but how new space is different than old space with this particular mission.
Yeah, it's a great example of a mission that's designed for small rockets and small satellites. It's NASA's first Earth science mission. It's based on small satellites. So the satellites are literally the size of a loaf of bread. This mission basically scans the inside of hurricanes in tropical regions. It's called Tropics. And we'll do it much more frequently at much higher resolution because the satellites are much lower in lower Earth orbit. A mission like this just 5 years ago, 10 years ago, would have cost $500 million for one big satellite parked tens of thousands of miles away from Earth. This mission is a $50 million mission. It's 3 launches from Astra. It's 6 satellites per plane, 2 satellites per launch. 4 out of the 6 need to be successfully deployed for the mission to be successful. So it doesn't require perfect reliability. It will deliver a tremendous amount of value to science. It's higher resolution, both spatially and temporally, at 1/10 the cost. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. As you noted, there's thousands of new satellites being launched, providing global communications, global Earth observation, understanding where carbon dioxide and methane is building up in the atmosphere. We're at the very beginning of a very significant shift in how space is improving life on Earth.
Just real quick, tell people like the economics of an Astra rocket and how it compares to what's historically been available.
Yeah, there are 2 things that really matter a lot. One is the price per kilogram of things into space, and the other is the price per launch. And the way you get price per kilogram down is you build the world's largest rocket, and you reuse it as many times as possible.
So that's Starship.
That's a great example.
SpaceX.
Fantastic example. On the other end of the spectrum, that's a really big machine. There's a tremendous amount of fuel and cost associated with operating it, like a container ship leaving a port, or like a 787 or a large A380. Now, when you get an Amazon Prime delivery, since Andy was here, they pull a van up to your house. They don't pull a semi-truck. They don't pull, right? So you want a very small, mass-produced, and so you bring your launch costs down, and what you do is you enable innovation. Because all these startups that are out there, $12 billion was raised collectively in the public markets in the last year from new space companies. They all need to get to space. So whatever happens to the economy, this is capital they've raised, and they're going to be looking for the lowest cost launches. And so what we can do is we can deliver a particular satellite to a particular orbit on a particular day, saving that company a tremendous amount of time. Even if a Starship were free, you might wait a year or two for that. What's the value of that time? That's why you FedEx things, you don't Maersk things, right?
Right, and how much? Tell me one more time how much you guys would cost versus like a large rocket.
So our base price is $3.95 million, and you compare that to a Falcon 9 at $65 million.
So
smaller capacity, but more.
So for people who want to try out new ideas in space, you don't have to raise $60 million. You can.
Yeah, this NASA mission would be impossible. I mean, they would have to have 3 Falcon 9 launches, which would be almost $200 million, to put these very small satellites in these 3 different planes in such a short period of time. Just doesn't make sense on a large rocket.
And Shannon, so it's kind of interesting because NASA did not really have a rocket or a means to get to space for a few years. Now they've built the world's most expensive rocket all over again at a time when commercial companies have come along with much cheaper rivals. Not to set you up to badmouth NASA because I know you work with them, but how do you expect NASA to evolve in the coming years if they place less of an emphasis on launch and we have like say all this pans out and we have a booming economy in low Earth orbit and then people want to try out all kinds of new ideas? Does NASA stay the same because of politics or does it actually change?
Well, I think what I can say is that, by having that cost savings with different launch providers and having a much wider variety in those launch services, you can focus more on science and much more on exploration, and that's really one of NASA's core missions. And so I think it could be a very welcome change. It would be a change, and I think there might be a little bit of resistance in the old guard, but I think that that's something that, especially with a new generation coming in, we can look much more at interesting science and thinking about the high risk, high reward, because not every launch is going to make it in this new paradigm. But that said, that's something that we could take that risk and we could really push the envelope with. So I think I could see it being a welcome change. It may take a little bit longer than some of us would like, but totally viable.
Like what has to happen? Because we've seen different directors come through with their agendas. Mm-hmm. There's so much politics tied to senators that have jobs tied to NASA programs in their states. Things haven't really changed much in decades. Like, how would this happen?
I think one of the biggest things is that you leave Earth, though. A lot of what we're talking about right now is Earth orbit. But by going to Mars, but by going to Venus, the outer planets, there are a lot of good reasons beyond science to do that. And I think if NASA continues to shift a focus really to science and exploration, in particular of the solar system and the world around us, we can start thinking about, truly metaphysical kinds of questions, like where did life come from? Like, are we alone here? And we could actually answer that question definitively and less abstractly. We think about ocean worlds where you'd need to drill and do that in the outer solar system. These companies, if they're able to prove themselves with this kind of capability, we could start to answer really important questions, and I think that's something that, I would love to see in the next 15 years.
And Chris, I know you're doing business with NASA now, but a sort of a similar question to you. When I first met you, Chris used to work at NASA Ames. He was like chief technology officer at NASA, I think the youngest NASA executive ever, but you were part of this. People might not know this, but there was like a renegade group of scientists and engineers at NASA Ames who were trying a lot of these new ideas out. How do you expect NASA to evolve, or do you expect it to over the next, say, 10, 15 years?
I heard there's a book coming out on that. I think that you said it well. I think that NASA needs to be on the frontier, right? So they need to be out there investing in things where there is no commercial market, right? Where getting out to the outer planets and the outer solar system, that's where you want to see taxpayers and our country make investments. The trillion-dollar space economy that Citi talked about in their report last week and Morgan Stanley talks about is on Earth primarily. Like if you look at Dara was up here talking about how services are what Uber's all about. Andy Jassy ran Amazon Web Services and now Amazon. It's all about services. And so if you think about the trillion-dollar space economy, it's about connecting everything on the planet, connecting every device, every car. It's about observing the entire planet. The NRO just awarded billions of dollars of contracts to some of these very recently startups to provide services of Earth observation and imagery. And so I think the transition here is a transition from a space economy that was NASA buying things and building satellites for $1 billion and launching for billions of dollars a space shuttle to services companies, tech companies really, that are allowing the economy to be a lot more liquid and fluid and more dynamic. I don't think every telco on Earth needs their own mega constellation. I think if we can build the internet in space and then we can have a multi-tenant cloud infrastructure in space that we can just provision on demand as needed, when companies can build a sensor and plug it into one of our satellites and have it just be in space next week, that really accelerates because the friction starts to get removed from all these companies having to build everything from scratch. I was in the tech, I was at classmates.com in the late 1990s. Back in those days, you had to build data centers and networks, and you had to buy big, capital investments in infrastructure. That's what space is today, and it's taking this leap forward from this mainframe era all the way into the cloud era in one big, and Amazon's putting $1 billion a year into their Kuiper thing. So Amazon's going to get into space in a very big way very soon. So,
like to your point, and you talked about this $1 trillion space economy. I mean, some of this is, well, I guess like a lot of business ventures, it's a gamble, but this one is particularly, it's kind of like, if you build it, will they come, right? We know people are using satellites to do imaging of the Earth. There's a lot of communications, the space, internet. There's science, and these are all big buckets, but after that, the examples of kind of what we will do in low Earth orbit or in space from a business standpoint become harder to put your finger on. Shannon, I'm curious as someone who's a scientist a little bit outside of the frenetic commercial space. I mean, how real do you think this moment in time is? This sort of space boom, I guess, or do you think it has legs to it?
Yes, I absolutely do. I mean, I also think it's, I talk about science and exploration, but there are reasons to go beyond. Just because when we discover and explore things beyond Earth, we start to discover things that are really different, and I think that do have business applications. I mean, there was a recent paper that came out that on Titan, there are all these liquid lakes and rivers, and I won't go on the science and why that's cool, but actually all of the hydrocarbons on the surface of Titan are hundreds of times larger than all of the combined gas and natural oil reserves on Earth. So that's something of interest when you start to think about, are there reasons to explore other planets that, and some of them could actually have very real applications to the kinds of things that, in terms of a business model, are those viable? And I would think yes.
And Chris, like a similar vein, I mean, launching rockets is sexy, but it's not a terribly good business traditionally. Even SpaceX, most of their valuation actually comes from their space internet business and the promise of that, as opposed to their rockets. We have dozens of rocket companies, each one has a little bit of a different take on this. You guys are going for quick and cheap. There's companies that are 3D printing rockets. That's their take. I'm curious. I mean, I think we literally have probably like 65 rocket companies now. How many are we going to have in 5, 10 years? How do you expect this to play out?
Well, I think very few of them actually put anything in orbit. Even very well-financed rocket projects that have been working on this for a long time, it's a very challenging thing to do. And then it's even more challenging to do it more and more frequently and continue to drive the costs down while you're doing it. And so I think that there's only 3 of us, I believe. SpaceX did it, Rocket Lab did it, we did it, and Virgin did it. That's a pretty short list of companies actually putting satellites in Earth orbit for customers. And so, we'll do it more and more frequently. We'll continue to drive costs down. That's what SpaceX has been doing. But I think that there's room for some competition, and I think that the company that brings the price per kilogram down the most wins, and I think the company that brings the price per launch down the most wins. And I think the price per kilogram thing is well under control down in Texas. So we're really focused on bringing the cost per launch down so that we can be the best partner to our customers. They're small businesses and new constellations that need very small satellites exactly where they need to go.
I think in the description of this session, I think there was the promise of talk of space tourism, and I threw us into satellites and the low Earth orbit economy. But Shannon, I mean, you're such a great person to ask about this. You studied Mars in detail. Like when Elon talks about setting up a colony on Mars, do you take this seriously? Do you think it's crazy? Are people going to be living there?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say, I like to remind people that space is incredibly punishing. There's no caviar, there's no champagne, there are no hot showers. I mean, it's a really punishing environment. So if camping in a room sounds like fun to you for a long time, then by all means go for it. But I do think, colonization of Mars is a pretty long way off. Even if you can launch the mass you would need, let's just pretend for a moment you could launch the habitat and all of that. There are a lot of, we'll call them challenges, but sort of bordering on impossible obstacles at the moment that we're at least 10 years off from. That said, I do think that's going to be at some point, boots on Mars is important, but for many other reasons than space tourism. I would not recommend tourism in space. It's not comfortable. But I think low Earth orbit, if you're going for like a day, that's fine. But a month, I think you'd want out after a week or so. But that's my 2 cents. So I like my hot showers.
Hey, Chris, I don't think I've never asked you this, even though I've known you for ages. You guys do not have any plans that I know about to get humans on rockets anytime soon. Do you view space tourism as a distraction or a real viable business?
I think it's definitely increased the awareness. And I think when you have celebrities and when you have the people leading big businesses getting on rockets and launching themselves into space for 5 minutes to see the Earth, there's a compelling argument that has brought more attention to space. But it is an infinitesimally small fraction of the space economy. So if you look at the $1 trillion space economy, it hardly shows up in any forecast. It's all about connecting every car on Earth so that as they collect information in the environment, we can train neural networks, and it's our phones and our it's observing the entire planet. Look at this war in Ukraine right now. You have the leader of one of the world's most powerful countries saying one thing, we're pulling out of Ukraine, and then you have Planet Maxar taking pictures 4 hours later, showing new pontoon bridges being built into the country. The pictures on the covers of our newspaper are truth coming from companies that were startups just a few years ago. And then the connectivity, you have Zelensky on TikTok being beamed to us live through Starlink, right? Starlink is the only communication service that is available in much of that country. Again, a private company. I should note the world's most valuable private company, I believe, as of late, right? So you have a company with over $100 billion valuation, not because of rockets and launches. So I think what we want to do is make launches not sexy. We want to have so many launches that no one even thinks about it anymore. How many FedEx trucks crashed today? Probably a few. No one cares, right? So really, hopefully no one got hurt. But if no one got hurt, who cares, right? So it's about the economics of a mega constellation. It doesn't matter if a few satellites don't work, if a few launches don't work. It's about what are the economics of that. And so if you can tune the economics of the services that we're providing from space to ensure that there's utility and value being created from them, then you start to accelerate things.
So, and this is for either of you. Along those lines, I mean, there is this potential for this new economy, for so much value to be unlocked, to study our planet in ways we never thought imaginable, to be connected in new ways. At the same time, when you have 60 rocket companies and 100 satellite companies, there is this same sort of human nature thing going on where it's like we see a new place to go and we flood in. Like how worried should we be that we're just going to repeat all the same mistakes we've made here on Earth in low Earth orbit?
Well, I mean, some will certainly fail. But I think you touched on something earlier, Chris, which was risk and our appetite for risk. I think we're gonna be able to take on much more, which is critical for us to push the envelope and for these companies to really succeed. And I think that the ones who manage that risk and where the line is, it's certainly, we need more risk than what NASA is able to do, right? We can't have a congressional hearing every time something happens on a launch pad. But on the other hand, if there are no successful launches and something always blows up, then that's that. So I think that the companies that can find that sweet spot in their assessment of risk and then what they're able to deliver will be the ones that succeed. And so I think that there'll be a little bit of natural selection here.
Because I mean, it's interesting because space was more or less controlled by like 5 or 6 governments for 60 years. And rather quickly, this is being taken over by companies. Like when you play this out in your head as to who's doing what in space and has control of these assets, how do you think this plays out versus nations versus companies in the next 5, 10 years?
I think it's increasingly becoming commercial, and we take things like GPS for granted. What would it be like without GPS in your phone, in your car? So these are the kinds of services that will get better and better. They'll increasingly not be multi-billion-dollar programs that the government throws at companies, but they'll be services that are operated by private companies, and it'll be competitive, and the services will get better. And I think that's where things are headed. I think that just like every company is an internet company. Remember when there were internet companies back in the late 90s, and then people realized, well, actually every company benefits from the internet in some capacity. Well, every company will benefit from space. Right? Just like Bluetooth is everywhere, you will have the ability to connect every device in the world to a network. That's going to be transformative. You'll be able to see everything on the planet in every conceivable wavelength at any arbitrary temporal. That'll change things. Like if you're a hedge fund, if you're an investor, if you're trying to figure out anything about your business, and if you're a global business in particular. So I think we're kind of in the early stages of the formation of a new trillion-dollar economy, and it's taking a giant leap from this mainframe era into a cloud era, right? Where no one satellite's going to matter anymore, just like no one server and Google's data center matters anymore to the services that you're consuming from Google. And we're just seeing this transition happening right now, and there are very few markets that have such a huge inflection point, and we're just beginning it. And maybe a recession's beginning, maybe it doesn't, but like the value of what you can do from space is real, and there's a lot of companies that are building right now.